We are live. At least three streams
that's
says
good.
so. Let's see what YouTube
Because I'm
says.
the man off the camera.
All right. I have confirmation. We are live.
What is that song? I Hate Mondays. It's by the guy that did the song "We Don't Need No Short People." I think that's the artist, but
Randy
totally,
Newman.
That might be it. I think he's the one that said. Was he the one that I Hate Mondays, or was that?
Or is it just another Manic Monday? I don't know. Am I just mixing songs here? I've gone off the rails.
That's the one to Carlisle.
All right, so we probably shouldn't sing.
Although, for trivia, I heard that. Well, I heard that Prince is the one that wrote "It's Just Another Manic Monday." How's that for some weird trivia?
I have no idea. That's interesting. Now it's stuck in my head though. So thank me. I don't know.
Now I want you to think of it being sung like Prince.
Very high. Yeah. Oh man.
All right, guys. You're watching on YouTube. We are just doing a warm up before our newscast begins in about
the pre-show banter.
A little bit of pre-show banter. About 7 minutes, 6-7 minutes.
So who had it in their 2022, on their 2022 bingo card that Conti was going to literally eat itself?
No idea.
No,
like,
didn't
that
have
was
that
not
one.
there.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I'd have bet a not insubstantial amount of money against that, in fact. Right?
Well, didn't they already leak some of their op notes? Like they were already a little shaky.
Yeah, they were a little topsy turvy.
Well, one of their affiliates did, though, right? I mean,
Right.
that I feel like is different. An affiliate leaking your playbook, right? I mean, whoever went rogue here clearly had a completely different level of access.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I don't know. Like, you talk about the level of access, and Jeremiah is going to talk about his research. Jake, Jeremiah, do you guys know each other?
For about 5 minutes, we're besties.
Okay. But like the amount of stuff that's been breached, Jeremiah, I think even since your article about a week ago, like it's pretty much out of date. There's so much new stuff that's been breached. It's pretty astounding. But like you said, goddamn, that's a pretty substantial breach for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
NVIDA got a breach.
There's a lot. The NVIDIA.
Yeah.
Well, so RAID forums got taken down. That was, I went to go look for NVIDIA and it wasn't there, and it turns out it got seized. So that's like to add to the pile of chaos. There's there's leaks, there's breaches. My whole theory that I gave last week is like all these people probably had like agents. They were like, all right, you know what? It's all going to hell in a handbasket.
Open. Yep. Let it go.
Open the gates.
We don't know how long our C2 is going to function when Russia's off the internet. So let's just go. Let's execute, right?
And I also, you remember whenever they first started coming out with the whole APT thing? And once again, folks, this is not the news. This is just us talking about the news. This is literally what we talk about all the time. We're horrible. We're horrible at parties.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
Horrible party gift.
But we remember after the Chinese stuff started breaking up and everyone was arguing, well, who came up with the term APT? Everything was the fault of APT for like the next 18 months. And I think that from now on, like until this stuff gets resolved, hopefully sooner rather than later, it's going to be, well, it's clearly the Russians, or it's clearly anonymous, or it's clearly like they're going to get blamed for every single incident from here on out. So like Corey said, it's like open season. People are like, we can do whatever we want because they're just going to blame these two groups.
Someone's gonna like hack someone and be like, it was Russia. They're like, no, Russia was off the internet at that point. there was no internet in Russia when this happened. So
yeah, Jeremiah.
Well, I was just going to say what's really interesting that I've witnessed firsthand of living in a country where some of these attacks are, even if they're not state sponsored, they're state accepted. There was a case in Ukraine, years ago, 2009, 2010, where there was a scareware company. They had a legit full company, customer service, everything. So basically the scareware, it went on your computer. It popped up every 5 minutes that you're infected. All your data is out. And then for $10, $15 a month, or whatever the price was, they would literally offer you a script that would take that pop-up down. And these guys made something stupid like $9 or $10 million. And the FBI cybercrimes unit contacted the Ukrainian authorities and said, hey, we've got these guys, they've got $10 million, they've ripped off these many people, we want them. So the Ukrainian authorities went to this company. I actually knew a few guys who were on the outskirts of this organization. And so the Ukrainian authorities went to him and said, the Americans said you made 10 million, give us 5 and we'll let you go. Yeah. So, they weren't involved, but they saw this opportunity to profit from it. So unfortunately, we do blame Russia because Russia does have a huge state-sponsored hacking program. China has a huge state-sponsored hacking program.
And we do too. Let's be honest.
Let's
throw some
I see
love.
nothing.
Let's throw some love with the United States here.
But we just haven't been as good at getting our stuff leaked and having it published and getting tracked down. And
oh no. Jake, do you have anything you would like to say about that, sir?
I mean, yeah. So about that.
Okay.
I think the difference.
Jeremiah
I was just.
I'm sorry, dude.
Oh yeah,
I'm
go ahead,
sorry.
Jeremiah.
No, yeah, that's it. The big thing is the next generation of cyber warfare and cybercrime literally will be state sponsored or nation states that allow this at some level. It really is. I mean, we see in Russia right now, kind of this twofold. They have a disinformation campaign. There's a massive amount of bots on Instagram and Facebook and social media that I've been sent them all day since I published this article of, this false information that America's putting nukes in Ukraine. I read one that said something that Ukraine, in partnership with America, is creating a virus that only affects Slavic people. And I'm like, okay, like the level of fantasy is beyond anything I could have ever imagined. But this disinformation through technology is poison. And that really is kind of the next generation of what cybersecurity is going to be is, okay, you can protect your network, but how do you protect speech? How do you protect this? People are idiots you have a majority of people that will read something so ludicrous and they believe it. How do you what sort of technology can help these people?
And I want to come back to that. I actually want to start with that. So here's how it's going to go. We're going to have a brief intro. I'm going to set up like a very short monologue at the front, trying to set the stage, and then I'm going to open it up to everybody on the panel. And I would like to kind of lead with that, with the disinformation, just because I think that that's the thing that a lot of people aren't getting. Like, they don't understand it's much more than just protecting your databases. The disinformation that's out there is monstrous, and we are not, like, mentally as human beings equipped for that garbage whatsoever. So, all right, Ryan, you ready to kick us out?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right, let's kick out the jams. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Black Hills Information Security, talking about news. We want to talk a little bit today about what's going on in Ukraine. I think that there's been a lot of hot takes, and a couple of our guests have been doing nothing but doing hot takes around the internet. So we're going to try to temper it down so it's more of a conversation a little bit. But I want to set up a couple of different things to kind of set the stage. First, back in 2001, as soon as September 11th happened, the entire focus and the apparatus of the United States government shifted almost overnight to be focusing on terrorism. As soon as September 11th happened, the entire focus... Oops, now I'm getting stopped back. There we go. We killed that. And what I want you to understand is with many governments, whenever something happens, the shift of focus is usually very intense and it's very myopic. And right now, if you look at what's going on in Russia, a lot of people are saying, well, the Russian cyber attacks haven't been that bad. It's not that big of a deal. Maybe the Russians suck anyway. Couple of things. Right now in Russia, I can almost guarantee you that all their cyber assets are focusing on locking down Russia, focusing on locking down information and access to information as much as they possibly can. So if we're looking at it, you shouldn't be thinking that maybe they suck or maybe they're not going to do it. They've got their priorities in Russia right now to locking down their own people. Also, Jake, I'm sure, is going to talk about this as well. SolarWinds was not a one-off. I know that seems a bit alarmist. Sky is falling, but trust me, SolarWinds was not a one-off. I can almost guarantee you that Russia and China and even the United States have actually implemented more attacks that are very similar to it as well. Also, whenever you're looking at what we are going to be dealing with over the next few years, we're absolutely going to be looking at attacks via proxy. China did this as well, where once they agreed to stop attacking us, a lot of their attacks went through proxies as well. And the final thing that I really, really want to hit before we get started is no matter what we talk about today, as we talk about different techniques, as we talk about PSYOPs, as we talk about maybe new exploits or 0 days, everything comes back to one thing that all of you need to be focusing on right now, and that's the basics and fundamentals. Keep your stuff patched, do good password policy, implement two-factor authentication. Focus on those core things in your organization. There's a whole bunch of talks that are going to be coming down the pipe over the next few weeks about possible new 0 days, possible new exploits. You need to keep focused on the core fundamentals of computer security. Don't get distracted by the noise and what an attack path is or what the IOCs are for a specific nation state attacker. Focus on the core fundamentals. Now, today I am joined by a crew, some of the people you have seen on the news. So if Ryan can bring us up to the crew as well. Some of the people you've seen again and again and again on the show. Some of them are relatively new. Some of them you've never seen before. We have Ryan, the shootist, who always makes us look and sound good. We have Ralph, the co-host, who is here pretty much all the time. We have Derek, who's been with BHIS for a long, long, long time as well. We have Corey, who's also on the news constantly. I'm sure you've gotten to know him. We also have two new people that you may not have seen before or you have not seen before here. Jake Williams is actually one of my best friends in the IT security space. We've taught at the SANS Institute for years together. We ran in very similar circles in DoD and some of the things that we were doing there. Never had those Venn diagrams touch, but a lot of the same types of things in different areas. But Jake absolutely is an expert. And Jeremiah, I want to say thank you very much, sir, for joining us. I believe that you pretty much win for being the furthest away. You're in Poland, is that correct? Talk a little bit about where you are and why you are where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have lived and worked in Kiev, Ukraine for the last 10 years, and none of us thought this would be what it is. We all kind of thought that it would be some sort of disruption to make a land corridor to Crimea that was taken in 2014. We thought it would be a bluff. I woke up at 5 a.m. to phone calls that people were grabbing suitcases and running. So literally, I packed all of my computer hardware, my hard drives, my flash cards and everything, 1-2 outfits, grabbed my 12-year-old daughter, and we hauled ass to Poland. And that's where I'm set up now. So yeah, I may be the furthest away, but I never thought in my lifetime I would be an American refugee in Europe.
Now, you mentioned that you went to Poland, and that makes it sound like it was just like you up and went to Poland.
Oh,
That's
Lord,
not
no.
the case, right?
Lord, no. Yeah, it took 4 days. It took 4 days, and what was crazy, and I mean, the cars only moved maybe 3 car lengths every 30-40 minutes. So you couldn't sleep because the border operates 24 hours a day. And then once you get to the Ukrainian side, okay, they check you out, they check your vehicle, and then you get to the Poland side. I mean, it's a legitimate border to the European Union. And yeah, so we couldn't sleep. I mean, literally, and nobody else could drive the car. My kid's 12. I wish she could have drove.
So I've got to be honest, man, I would have had her driving the car. Seriously.
Yeah.
Like, you take over for daddy. People come with guns, wake him up, you know?
Yeah. Well, everything was fine in the western part of Ukraine. I'm going to be honest. We did see we saw the airport blown up outside of Kiev. And man, I'm going to tell you, it was almost like an out of body experience. And I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I saw a helicopter and I'm like, okay, helicopter, no big deal. You know, probably Ukrainian. I had no idea that the Russians were already that deep in. And I saw the actual, projectiles falling, and it was like this glow. And then I saw the black clouds and I was like, all right, that's not cool. And all the cars in front of us started turning around, and it was maybe 10, 15 helicopters, fighter jets, cars turning around. And there was this moment where I'm like, okay, my next steps determine whether we live or die, because the real fear was that they may have been targeting the actual main exit route out of the city. So I literally planned all of my escape routes on small roads. Took us a lot longer, but here we are, safe. And my heart and my mind go out to all my friends in a very normal European country, which was one of the biggest outsourcing hubs for technology, not only in Europe but in the world. Because in the old days, when the Soviet Union collapsed, one of the things about Ukraine was most of the major industries like metallurgy, pharmaceuticals, different sectors of the economy, they were gone. They were taken by, mafia, oligarchs, whatever. But the young people understood technology. They understood how important that this was, because you could deal in digital currency. You could deal, coding doesn't know a border. And so Ukraine really was a kind of shining star on the hill, and it's heartbreaking to see what's happened. So that's me. That's my introduction, and I'm the furthest away of the crew.
That's a pretty badass introduction. Now, you're not here just because of that, even though that story is amazing. You've also been doing some research on, I believe, cyber attacks in Russia, which is something we don't hear a lot about. We hear a lot about attacks on the outside. Can you tell us a little bit about your research? I hear some major newspapers and magazines are going to be picking it up. But can you tell us a little bit about what your research is, about what's been happening inside of Russia with these attacks as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny how I came up with this idea. I discovered a database of Fox News maybe like a month ago, and it was their internal CRM, had all their employees' email addresses, all of kind of the repositories of where they store their programming, the names of all their employees, producers, directors, stars. And I'm like, man, that's big news. That's Fox. That's a household name. And I pitched it to a good friend of mine who works for Forbes. And he was like, I'm sorry, bro. He's like, this is amazing, but everything right now is all Ukraine, all Russia. And so I was kind of bummed out. I'm like, man, in what world do we live in when a Fox News data breach doesn't make news?
Yeah.
And so I started thinking, I'm like, I really need to see what's going on with Russian data. And so I started analyzing Russian databases, and they were all hacked using what I would consider, there was a malicious script that came out about a year ago. It was Bout. And basically it was very different from when ransomware, the automated ransomware, when that comes in, at least there's an avenue out. They want to encrypt that data. They want to, they want Bitcoin. They want money. That's all they want. Where the Bot was malicious in the way where it just destroyed everything. So Anonymous made a call for a cyber attack against the Russian government on day one. And it was pretty clear that that's what's happened. A lot of the records that I saw were wiped out. They were gone. And then all the folders were renamed with, glory to Ukraine, Putin stopped this war, hacked by Ukraine, different things like that. So that's basically, my coverage was really just trying to see what was happening with these Russian databases. And while searching those, I found some interesting things. I found internet provider. So Anonymous announced earlier this morning that they had hacked into Russian state television, and everybody was like, okay, we need more verification, or we need to validate this. But even based on what I saw with secret keys and seeing where those files are hosted, it's hypothetically very realistic that someone could intercept that, or at least make it seem like that is a legitimate source they're pulling from, and then stream whatever content you wanted to. So yeah, I mean, it was very interesting for me to see that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll come back again. Jake, like I said, Jake has been working in, I guess, the threat intel nation state space and following it for as long as I've known him. And he's done a lot of research. He's got a lot of insights on this. And more importantly, a lot of like Fortune 50, Fortune 25, and even up companies. Jake is one of the first people that they pick up the phone and they get his opinions on. And also, Jake is one of the people that I ultimately pick up the phone and I get his opinions as well. Jake, can you give us a little bit on kind of what things have been going on for you over the past like week or so, week and a half, 2 weeks?
Well, I mean, obviously it's been very busy, right? Like everybody else, I'm very interested in obviously the Conti leaks and TrickBot leaks as well, and how all that's playing together, and some possible interesting nation state, potential connections there also. It's been pretty busy, obviously, I can't hold a candle for a minute to Jeremiah's story there. My gosh, man, that was harrowing. I can't even imagine with my own kid trying to, wow, hats off to you, brother. A lot of folks over the last week plus have been very, very concerned on the whole cyber attack side. Oh my gosh, Russia's definitely going to come in and take down our networks. And then separately, I keep hearing about the, if it's not Russia, then, someone else is going to try to hide in the noise. And, by and large, while I certainly am not going to be the guy to say that definitely isn't going to happen, because none of us have a crystal ball, I've definitely been cautioning folks that the worst thing you can do right now is not follow your change management and try to trying to eliminate years of technical debt in a week, right? Just because CISA says shields up, right? I love CISA, awesome work, but man, there's a lot of people panicking right now and trying to do just months of IT security projects in like 24 hours. And that's just it's a recipe for disaster.
And with that, we talk, I tweeted out like earlier this week, I said the single best time to start securing your network against hot nation state on nation state action was 2 years ago. The second best time is today. There are things that you can do, but this gets into, like, once again, go back to the fundamentals. What isn't patched on the outside of your environment? 2FA, like, they're not going to come in with elite hacking stuff to every single organization. They're just not. So my question, I want to open this up to everyone, is why the hell does it take this? Like with SolarWinds, that was bad, right? And I still have customers to this day that something like this happens and they're like, oh my God, what should we be doing? I don't know, like, is this finally the point where people are going to start getting it, or are they just going to be a flash in the pan? They're going to realize in a couple of weeks that they aren't, compromising, thousands of systems immediately, and it's going to go back to the status quo, where we're back to tech debt for the long haul. Does this actually change things?
Well, if it doesn't, nothing will. Just saying.
Yeah.
So I have a counter opinion here and say I do think it's a flash in the pan. I really do, and I worry that CISA. By the way, all love to CISA. I want to be like super clear on this, right?
You don't want Jen calling you.
I do not. You, sir, are correct. I do not want that. But no joke, right? I mean, they did what they had to do. I want to be super clear on that. They did what they had to do, yet at the same time, as far as putting the alert out, and at the same time, when inevitably, when nothing happens, folks will then look at that and say, well, that the next time it's going to be a cry wolf kind of issue. So I'm looking at a lot of orgs that I've already worked with a couple of orgs already that have had self-imposed outages, trying to jump too fast. And now we're like, whoa, got to back off that security piece before it breaks something else in operations. And then separately, when we don't get any, heavy impact, I really do think we're going right back to actually probably worse than we are now, honestly.
Yeah, because they're going to say that this becomes the high watermark that we're dealing with. So, all right, Jeremiah, I got a question for you. So Russian systems, are they as bad as U.S. systems? Worse? Better? What do you think in digging around their dirty laundry for the past couple of weeks? And by the way, he's not hacking stuff, just to make that clear.
Yeah, absolutely not.
He's finding organizations, he's finding breaches. Where do you take the Russians are as far as like their tech debt? Are they just as bad as us? Are they worse? What are your opinions on that?
No, it's a little bit of a different beast there, because the FSB, which is, the leftover of the KGB, that's their state security service, many years ago, because they were so scared of organization, people organizing for protests or government dissent. I forget the exact number. I want to say it's like 3,000. But if you have a blog or a website that gets traffic over the amount that they determine is important or a national security risk, you have to share your database information, your login credentials, all of that with the state security service. So that not only creates a different vector for a potential data breach, but it also puts additional eyes on your network. Kind of a gift and a curse, I'll say, in that respect. I found one of the databases that I found, and of course I covered that in the article, it was 250,000 users with their names, their email addresses. These are people that could be targeted for phishing. So I would say that America is kind of more the Wild West. We've gotten much better about data breaches because of individual state laws for data privacy. And not to mention, if you're a company and you have a data breach, it's going to cost you a small fortune to provide credit monitoring or anything like that. So America has done a good job, I would say. Nothing is perfect, but even in the 5 years that I've done this, I've noticed a huge difference. Where in Russia, there's almost no comparison, I would say. But the fact that Russia is so tightly regulated and controlled, it's very different from the American system. Now, I will say this, I just want to throw this in. During COVID and everyone working remotely, there was literally a tsunami of data breaches where companies and organizations would open up outside access so that people could work from home and mistakenly would open it for everyone. So there was just this tidal wave of data breaches during the COVID years. I'm starting to see it taper off now, but there was a lot of data exposed. And unfortunately, nation states are harvesting all that data. They'll use it for years. We have no idea what they're going to do with it or how deep they'll dig with it.
So we've got a question. Go ahead. I think
I was going to say I'm a book person, and when all this started happening, I kind of wanted to know the background, and so I read Andy Greenberg's book about Sandworm, and one of the things he kind of wraps up with is the fact, or his assertion is that the U.S. is kind of more dependent on like digital systems more than like Russia or Ukraine are. Like in 2015, Ukraine's power grid got knocked offline on New Year's Day or Christmas Eve or whatever. And they were like, they had the trucks ready. They had guys go out. It was out for 2 hours because they had people. Everyone was ready to go out, flip relays manually because they have done that many times. Whereas in the US, when they did like some training exercises, the people were more accustomed to working with digital systems. And when the digital systems were lying to them and telling them information that was wrong and voltages that were wrong and all that stuff, they struggled to get that kind of like, oh yeah, you have to actually go to the substation and like change something physically to get this to work. So that's kind of a perspective on like, when you're talking about like the systems in those countries, the US is probably more secure, right? But we're also more dependent on those systems. Whereas in Russia or Ukraine, there probably are maybe more legacy stuff around, but they're used to like overriding it and dealing with it manually. So that's my take on it. But
cool. We got a question from the audience from Cap. Cap said, does anyone feel like the threat of invoking NATO Article 5 joint response in response to a cyber attack has potentially delayed or dissuaded cyber attacks? Jake, I'm going to let you take this one first.
I don't know that that's really the case, right? Obviously, anything we're guessing here regardless, but I'm not sure that that's really the case. I think that, first off, on the cyber attack side, Russia is really busy right now. It's clear that they're state actors, right? They're nation state threat actors. Just like the military thought that they would be done with this in a period of days. Nobody expected, I certainly didn't, I don't believe Russia did, expect the detail or the depth of sanctions that they ultimately got. And so when I look at that, I think, they probably are looking at trying to spy on NATO. I say spy, but like all hands on deck are currently targeting NATO. They're targeting, Five Eyes countries, European Union, et cetera, trying to figure out what's the next thing to happen in sanctions. And so I think it's less about Article 5 being invoked than, or the threat even of it being invoked than the fact that, Russia is in a position it didn't believe it would be in. And looking at, cyber attacks, I think it's a resourcing issue, even if they had the intent.
And it's kind of like I started at the beginning. If you look at what's going on right now, like if you're looking at Russian quote unquote management chain of command, they're far more concerned about their own population, what their own population is able to get access to for information, than actually outward facing attacks at this point. It's very clear that there's a lot of effort going on to try to reduce the amount of information coming out of Ukraine, getting into Russian citizens, and there's varying levels of how successful they are at that. But do you, and I'm going to throw this up to Jeremiah, do you think that will shift over time? Do you think that they're going to get that under control, or do you think that that's a game of whack-a-mole that they're going to keep playing as long as this operation is hot?
Totally whack-a-mole. Russia has done a very good job of making sure that the people are misinformed, or whatever information channels they get are very controlled. And like I said, I'm not political. I hate everything and everyone. But I've seen from friends and, because I've lived there for a decade. I've lived in Ukraine for a decade. I'm originally from Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. So I have this good perspective. I'm not political in any way. I have no bias. I have no, predetermined misconceptions about what everything is. But, some of the Telegram channels that I see are horrific. And if the Russian people knew, this special operation that was supposed to take place for 1 day, 2 days, if they knew the consequences of that, I don't think they would support that. And this is my personal opinion. I don't speak for anyone or anything when I say this, but the Soviet Union always had to have an external enemy to unite people internally. And the problem is there has been no external enemy for many years, because when you have IKEA and Zara and all these luxury brands, and you have money and you have all these things coming into Russia, the people forgot about the enemy, because you're wearing a Rolex, you're driving a Bentley, you're driving a Tesla, you're showing your status and your wealth. So they grew apart from this external enemy. And I would hate to think that the war in Ukraine was something that simple, but I also understand that internally in Russia, all all protest, any opposition to the government is very much crushed. It's absolutely crushed. If anonymous or additional groups can get information into the country, and I had said this earlier, that Russia just passed a law this week about fake news. And fake news in Russia is basically whatever the government determines is fake news. So if you publish an actual video of a bridge in Ukraine falling and people dying, it's fake news, potentially. I'm not the one to decide that, but if a Russian court decides that, you go to jail for 15 years. So the lack of information into Russia is a huge problem right now for the Russian people. I would like to see that change, but Russia also has been exploring a closed loop internet where basically they can, communicate and work within that circle, but they won't get any outside news. It's a tragedy all the way around, and I don't know what could fix it at this point. Really, I don't.
Well, and so, there's a lot of conversations about the degradation of the military forces in Russia, that clearly there was some degradation. There were some articles that talked about generals a number of years ago were trying to modernize and update the Russian forces. They got kicked out because they were making oligarchs mad. And now the people that have been running it, I think for the past 2 to 3 years, have been really focusing on keeping the oligarchs happy at the expense of the actual military. And I'm talking about kinetic military. Do we believe, or do we think, that maybe the Russian cyber offensive capabilities have been degraded and neglected at the same level as their actual kinetic assets? Or do you think that that's a completely different group? Absolutely. Or, were they focusing on, instead of meeting specific objectives for FSB, they were focusing on cybercrime and making people money? Do we think that we've seen that same type of degradation in that particular branch of the military and intelligence? Or do you think that that's not the case?
That's actually a great question. And my personal opinion, and of course, I'm only speculating based on what I've seen and what I've read here, is that they are very separate. And I know this from my years in Ukraine, the actual hardware aspect of the military is very structured. You have your contractors, you have everyone with their hand out at many levels to build a tank, to get that metal, to source that metal, to build the tracks. There are so many people involved in that. Where the cyber aspects, we can remember the troll farms. That was funneled through an oligarch. An oligarch basically paid for that. And of course, we can't validate or verify if that was paid by the Russian Federation officially, but absolutely there was an oligarch that was sponsoring and paying for a troll farm that was spreading misinformation during the American elections. So the bottom line is, as long as Russia is on the global internet, we can expect disruptions. We can expect any sort of cybercrime or hacking or cyber warfare. These are uncharted waters. I mean, they really are. In the old days, an army lined up, you looked your enemies in the eye and you ran toward each other. Now you can hide, you can spoof, you can, use different IPs, you can pretend you're somewhere else. I mean, we really live in the Wild West of cyber warfare.
So, Jake, we've had a massive breach of a Russian hacking group. And I've read some of it, not all of it, because, wow, that's a lot of information. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to be honest. There are some things in that breach that make me seriously wonder about their technical abilities.
Well, it wasn't only Russian, right?
Yeah.
Someone was something else.
Right. It wasn't only. What are your thoughts? And then we'll put it up to the rest of the group as well.
I mean, real quick, before I answer that, just to go back on the technical capability, like we've seen, obviously a degradation in the physical, armed forces. I don't believe for a minute that also sits in the cyber side as well. I just that's not something that I'm there. But on the league side and their technical capability, oh my gosh, yeah. Look, there are we've known for a long time that these folks were affiliate based. And some of the affiliates rock, and a lot of them are like, oh my, they're horrible. And I think we're seeing a lot of that, right? That they are catering to the lowest common denominator because, they had, and if you're thinking like, well, why would they ever use those, right? BHIS has obviously an interest in making sure that every pen test that goes on happens with great quality, right? These folks, not so much, right? And so, they had a numbers game. They had more accesses than they had time to work them. And so anybody that was willing to break the law for a cut of that, game on, here you go, let's go. And so we are definitely seeing that there are some top tier folk, right? And then there are definitely, you see some of the publication on very low tier, but make no mistake about it, they were working to get access to EDR, very specifically Sophos and Carbon Black, specifically to create bypasses for those. And so, that's not something that like ankle biters are doing.
And I think that's an interesting point, right? It's people were asking, what's the example I was alluding to? I was specifically the example of one of them was asking, how do I exit VI? And I was just waiting whenever I was reading that. I was waiting for, somebody to say, how do I exit VI? And the answer is next time use nano. And then see like a whole VI nano argument show up. That didn't happen. They were like escape, shift, WQ, enter. They gave them the right answer for it.
Missed opportunity.
But that's interesting, right? I think that shows a level of skill disparity within the organization, or it shows specialization. Certain people have certain specialized skills versus others as well. CJ just popped in a question, and he's not on the main YouTube or Discord chat. The question was, and this is interesting because there's been some articles that have been released, but he said, what about the Russian failure to prep the cyber battlefield? I'm speaking for him because I think he's having mic troubles. But I think I got that right. That's interesting, right? Because if you're looking at any type of battle space you're trying to go into, there's a lot of legwork that needs to be done before that. Sure doesn't look like that legwork went into the ground assault. It also kind of seems like that legwork didn't go into the cyber assault. Well, did it? Did it not? Why or why not? What's your thoughts? Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Quick point to that. In 2014, during the revolution, so in 2014, Ukraine had a Russian puppet president, Viktor Yanukovych. He was completely loyal to Moscow, very similar to Belarus. Belarus is basically a Russian satellite. As we saw with the invasion, the Russian troops also entered from the north. So they really thought that once they started bombing airports and shelling, that the key government officials would run away and it would be done. There's no reason to launch a cyber attack. You want the key infrastructure in place, because if you're going to take over a state, you don't want to have to rebuild everything. You don't want to have to rebuild the infrastructure. And then 10 days later, we realized that's not the case. And Ukrainians are very much not Russians in that aspect, that they will fight. They will defend their cities. They will do this. They were basing that logic on what happened to the Russian propped up government of 2014. And that's why they didn't prepare a cyber attack, because they didn't think there was a need for it. They really thought that the government would run away immediately.
So John Helt brought up a great point. How do we know that SolarWinds wasn't battlefield prep? And Jake, I want you to take that one, because you and I we've discussed this, right? Like, I believe fundamentally that SolarWinds was not a one-off. There is other attacks, supply chain attacks like that has to be out there. Mm-hmm. But you've had some interesting takes on it. Go ahead. What is your take on that? Was SolarWind part of this? Because it could be.
Yeah. Can we challenge very quickly, though, the prepping the cyber battlefield? We think about prepping a battlefield traditionally, right, as like pre-assault fires and artillery fire. Well, very much like what you're seeing a lot of now, right, a week plus into the conflict. But traditionally, on the cyber side, you're not going to see the prep of the battlefield. That largely is, initial intrusions, so that they're there to deliver an effect if and when the time is right. But yeah, on the SolarWinds side, I don't think SolarWinds was actually, battlefield prep for this specifically. But I think it would be extraordinarily, an extraordinarily bad idea to discount the fact that there's likely some other software that rushes in. I mean, they did it already before with MEDOC. That's how NotPetya got started. Bad Rabbit, all right, that was a poisoned flash update, as it were, or malicious flash update. And we saw it again with SolarWinds with very, very selective targeting. I don't think there's any doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that they have some other software supply chain, grenade that they're getting ready to lob. But you got to time it, right? Because this is something, you only get to use that weapon once, or a particular weapon like that once. And so I just don't think the time is right yet for it. When that time is up anybody's guess.
So someone mentioned NVIDIA. Do you think maybe that could have been related at all? I mean, I don't know how it would have gone so poorly that they had to just go public with it. But I mean, there's code signing certs, there's driver updates, potential vectors there.
And Corey, we've already seen some of those code signing certs from NVIDIA being used in malware attacks already. So, yeah, what does everybody think about that?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, right? If you were going to take those code signing certs, and if I'm a nation state and I've got code signing certs, I'm not blabbing about it on the internet, and forcing or asking NVIDIA to release the coin miners, right? So I don't know, man. I think that's where I'm at, right?
Fair.
All right. So Jeremiah, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool. Just saw the camera went dark. And I'm usually I'm more nervous with you going away than most everybody else.
Thank you.
So you were talking about kind of the PSYOPs campaign that Russia is waging internally and externally, or we were talking about before we went live. This is an area of cyber that honestly, most cyber professionals aren't ready to deal with. We don't know how to handle it. It's not something that's in our wheelhouse. And also, I think as a society, especially in the United States, we're seriously touchy on the subject because somebody can come to me and say, that thing that you retweeted, and this has happened, that actually came from a Russian troll farm. And you're like, but I wanted to believe that so much. And it's hard because what happened up until this, and it was happening in Ukraine. I'd like to hear a little bit about what PSYOPs were going down in Ukraine, because there was an FSB, there was a letter that was released from an FSB officer, at least allegedly, that talked about how this whole entire thing was really kind of foisted upon them and it was a surprise and they weren't ready for it. But basically in it says that because of the success of the PSYOPs campaign in Ukraine, with a really, really low approval rating of the president. I think Zelensky, his approval rating before this was it in the 20s or low 30s? I can't remember. It was really low.
It was low. It was low, but that's what happens when you don't have any real problems.
Yeah.
When there's no problems and you're mad that your president was a former comedian, you don't have any real problems.
Yeah. And then also they're like parliament and everything had really low approval ratings. And that was part of the reason why Russia thought that they were successful in kind of prepping the battle space to get Ukrainians to be on their side because they thought that they would be seen as liberators. Can you talk a little bit about disinformation, specifically in like Russia and Ukraine? And you were talking about it in a broader context, which I thought was great as well. Yeah,
absolutely. People hate Ukraine's parliament because historically there are several oligarchs, not many, and it's been described as a tribal clan where one oligarch funds a political party and that political party basically makes the rules in the country that favor that oligarch. Very similar to American pharmaceutical companies.
No, that never happens. Never happens here.
I said it.
Never, ever happens.
Yeah.
By the way, we'd like to take a moment. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. Thank you very much. Yeah. And back to Jeremiah.
So the thing with Ukraine is they have been the testing ground for all of Russia's cyber weapons for years. I mean, they're not just daily attacks. There's multiple attacks per day. So literally, Ukraine has been a testing ground. And every time that there is a new feature to an existing cyber weapon, Ukraine is the place they test it. And the same with like former Soviet states, because, they won't act up. They won't, go back. The disinformation with the bots, unfortunately, in Russia, the disinformation works so well that I know people personally whose family members don't talk to each other. After Russia took Crimea and Donbass and Lugansk, which are the two regions to the east. So basically, they came in and they said these are pro-Russian separatists. And legitimately, they were basically Russian soldiers without patches who said that they were separatists. And I know family members that don't talk anymore, because they believed this messaging campaign. They believed this disinformation. And if you look, read a transcript of Putin's last two speeches. It's insanity because, they're saying that the whole war in Ukraine right now is against Nazis. The president of Ukraine he's a Jew. He's a practicing Jew. And I've lived there for 10 years. It's a normal European country. The people are nice. They're normal. The humanity that I saw crossing this border as an American refugee was better than, it was amazing. There were people that would come up and knock on your window and ask if you had water, ask if you had food. They're very humane people. The disinformation campaign and the cyber ops that are taking place globally, Ukraine was the testing ground. Russia definitely tested all of this on Ukraine.
Well, and I think that they thought they had it in the bag because there was
absolutely
quote, a lot of dissent in the country. And I just want to take a moment and thank God that in the United States, we don't have families that stop talking to each other because of political dissent.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
So, and that's hard, right? I think that that's really, really, really hard. We joke about it, but I've got a question, just kind of opening it up. Like, I'm trying to get information from multiple different sources. Do any of you have an itch in the back of your head that you feel like, pro Russia, against Russia, pro Ukraine, against Ukraine, that you're like, I'm reading some propaganda that someone's feeding me? Does that worry you at all?
So you weren't on when I was saying earlier that if it's coming from the news, you should just consider it to be propaganda, right? Because at least in Western news medias, they're in it to make money, and they all have the same message no matter what. And you haven't heard anything about COVID for what, 11 days, right? So is it over? It's now they're on to the new
countries getting invaded and civilians getting bombed kind of pushes that away.
Yeah. To the side, right? So
but you're like you said, in the media, they're like, this sells. Like I've been glued. Like
I did a conference talk at the Wild West Hackfest that was virtual on how the news media, no matter what the outlet, they have the same message, and with sentiment analysis and natural language processing. So it's true.
So my opinion on the whole thing is that and we were talking about this a little bit before the show, but watching a war play out in 2022 is a different beast because you have the news and you have, the traditional media, you have the people running around with, flak vests and cameras, but then you also have every human has a cell phone pretty much.
Yeah.
And every human has a social media account. And so my, at least personally opinion is that it's difficult to get fake news to stick because you have so many, there's so much data out there, like the January 6th incident in the US is a classic example. Like if you were here and your phone was on, we will eventually figure it out. Like it might not be today, it might be 6 months from now, but I think that that active feed of everything that's happening, everything that's posting, all that stuff is someone, I assume, is figuring out the, way to unentangle all this various information. And obviously Russia's totally conducting their own campaign on TikTok to pay people to say certain things or on any social media platform, not just TikTok. So
one of the things I want to kind of run by Jake, because once again, we've had this conversation. I feel bad because I'm making Jake re-say things. Jake's been deployed and he's been in hot zones. And one of the things about, whenever you're actually in a military conflict, and CJ, I think he was on and he went out, is even whenever you're like within a mile of what's going on, the information is incredibly inaccurate. It's going all over the place. You don't actually know what's actually happened until a good time after the conflict is over. And somebody once told me, the more detailed the information is, probably the more wrong it is. Like if they're like, these people attacked this particular city from this particular location on this particular street, and they lost this many tanks and they lost this many fuel vehicles, and then this is exactly how many people died. Like seriously, people that are on the ground fighting don't know that much information when you're literally like next door to it, like the fog of war, as CJ was talking about. Is that still true in the TikTok world? Like, it seems like a lot of these troops, they're like, yeah, we just took out this convoy. Here's a selfie. It's God, it's weird. Like, it's just strange. So, Jake,
can I throw out there though that more data isn't always better?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, heck, I remember I'm dating myself here, right? But like, 90s, they were introducing like squad level radios, right? I mean, where everybody was walking around. Well, I don't have one right in reach, but a lot of the just handhelds, right? And that for most units did not increase the amount of or the quality of data reported necessarily. There was just more to process, and I can't fathom now with video being available, and I just can't even imagine, trying to take all that in, because on the one hand, you all, as a commander, you would have to, right? Like, why would you pass up a data source? And on the flip side, at some point, you can get into this analysis paralysis, and and then obviously more opportunities for disinformation, or misinformation as well, intentional, right? Let alone the just misreported in the first, or accidentally misreported in the first place. So yeah, it's I can't even imagine.
What's also interesting too is the battleground intel, right? So the platforms are providing that as well, right? So some of these platforms have, had to like shut off in Ukraine because they're providing intel to both sides, right? To your point, and something that you could search, right? Whether it be GPS location, whatever kinds of video of whatever may be happening, and then relaying that information to figure out what's going on. But I kind of agree to your point, right? That the more information, it's harder to orchestrate, right? Like those numbers that John was bringing up about how exactly many tanks, like someone's going out there, like their job is to count them and like put a little mark so they don't, like,
dude,
wild,
imagine the stories in the future. When I was a young lass, I was in the TikTok squad of the Ukrainian-Russian war, and I had to go through so many dancing videos of the Russian
I've got that's going to happen. I've literally seen the TikTok videos, like the one where the girl's showing how to drive a Russian tank.
Yes.
It's hilarious. The other thing that just makes my skin crawl constantly through all of this is, does anybody take the damn cell phones away from people? Like, you have Russian troops that are doing videos. You have Google Maps showing, well, there's a traffic jam just north of Kiev. Like, what the hell is going? Well, this would never, well, I shouldn't say it would never happen. It wouldn't be allowed at this level in the U.S. military. I mean, it seems like everybody, are they checking to make sure you have your cell phone before you get in the convoy in Russia? They're like, well, comrade, do you have your cell phone? Yeah. Is it on? Yes.
In case you get lost, please check Google Maps.
How many
and then
followers?
They're like, how the hell did they find us and bomb the What the hell, folks? Like, am I missing something here?
It's insane. A modern war is just wild, right? And I do agree with you, John, that like they wouldn't have U.S. soldiers with their cell phones out, like, oh, in case you get lost, pull up Google Maps and they'll be able to find your way home, right? I mean, that's literally why you teach land navigation. But it is wild. I mean, like, I've been in combat zones, I've been in combat, and like literally when stuff goes down, right, every plan goes out the window. Like, you have this plan, you start executing, you start following, and then just stuff breaks, right? Like everything starts breaking along the way. And back to your point, like, you're not counting, what happened, right? The recollection of the event is more of you just trying to get through it and hopefully making decisions snap in that moment, right? So it is wild in a modern war.
Ralph, I apologize. I forgot that you were deployed as well.
And actually, I was with PsyOps, right? So I was with PsyOps, and it's really interesting to look at that perspective, right? Because the PsyOps, right, from the U.S. military perspective, a lot of stuff that we're doing is not talking about the digital side, right? And like, I know
I'm going to ask you, look, if you were doing PsyOps today, like, can you imagine going to your commanding officers and you're like, we're going to need some. We're gonna need some cell phones.
TikTok.
Why?
We need dance instructions. I'm teaching the squad how to dance together.
And you could be like, so let me get this straight. So the enemy is taking TikToks at locations, giving their location away. Yes, sir. It appears to be that way. It's like,
we need TikTok intel, right? And that's so crazy. I would never imagine that. But yes, I mean, just thinking about just like the my experience in PsyOps, which was a little while ago, it wasn't that long ago. And, currently what this modern war is, what we're considering a modern war and how it's being played out. A lot of the preconceived notions of psychological operations are a little bit different than what I've experienced, right? And it is one of those moments where you have snap decisions. You're like, I need these devices to help me, better.
But is it a modern war or is it a stupid war?
There's
Yes.
I'm just saying today it's stupid, but it is modern, right?
Well, the other scary thing is how much power TikTok has, because we know that it's an aggressive data harvesting type of application, right? Which side are they playing? Are they like US people or Ukraine? Here's the location of all the Russian convoys that are posting on TikTok, and then like on the Russian side, they're like Russia. Here's all the locations of the people. Like, how are they responding to like requests for that? Like, are they getting requests for that? I can only imagine what they're gonna. Hopefully, they don't do anything too sketchy. But
well, that's actually a great point because even during the Trump administration, remember he was pressuring TikTok to be sold, and because this was a Chinese data harvesting, potentially Chinese data harvesting. So, and China right now is Russia's biggest ally. So potentially, they absolutely could be sharing geographical or other information from the Ukrainian side with the Russians, being that is a strategic ally. But what Ralph said, we absolutely need a TikTok brigade. I think someone needs to contact the Pentagon right now, and we need a budget. We need a budget.
So, and let's talk about China. And Jake, I want to throw the first one to you. Do you think China is a bit shocked at how poorly Russia has performed? Like, basically, they're like, yeah, we're going to work with Russia on this one, and we're going to get a lot of revenue out of this Ukraine thing. Great. And now they're just like, what kind of show is this in Russia? Like, did they think maybe you think there's some like buyer's remorse over siding with Russia on this?
That's a really good question. I don't think there is at all. And Ryan hit it in the chat here, the private chat over here. This is the test run for Taiwan. So China, as it turns out, is benefiting from this tremendously because they're watching the playbook and they're watching, in a place that, look, Taiwan. First off, Taiwan's a freaking country, right? China, eat it. But all that said, right? Let's not kid ourselves, right? Nobody cares about. Nobody cares about. Taiwan strategically is important to us, 100%, right? Important to the let's call it the Western world or what have you. I think that they're benefiting tremendously from China's benefiting tremendously from this. Although I do believe that, like many of us, I think China probably thought that Russia had a bit more military prowess than what we're seeing. All that said, that just puts China in an even better position. If they need additional forces, with a Taiwanese, offensive, you no longer have the same fear of Russia, I think, than you did maybe a month ago.
So, and that's one of the things, like you talk about China and kind of what they're learning from this, right? Number one, if Russia is taking this, they're listening to Ralph and all of us, and they're like, all right, number one, take cell phones from people, guys. We should have done that. Number two, we need to look up this land nav thing. Like, what is that? We should train our people in that as well. But if we're looking at like the Taiwanese thing, I think you're absolutely right that China is learning from this. But I think that China learned a lot. If we look at what they've learned, number one, the international community does care if a quote unquote sovereign nation is attacked. Number two, the sanctions came a lot faster than I think China or Russia expected them to. And, number three, attacking and maintaining a country is an incredibly difficult task under good circumstances. And this is like worst case scenario. I've got Ukrainian friends, and whenever people like Russia's going to invade, I'm like, they're going to die. Like Ukrainians, they think it's been referred to as the bloodlands for how much blood has been spilt in Ukraine. Ukraine's amazing group of people, but it shows that trying to take and hold something is really hard. And my fear is this just made China better.
So the sanction thing is I feel like where they've got to be taking the most notes is on the economic side, right? Because it's one thing to like, oh, gas prices are going to suck for a while, sanction everything in Russia because we're not getting everything from Russia. But when you look at China, like, how is Apple going to sanction China? They're like, hey, don't send us those iPhones you're making. They're ours, but like, how is that going to work? Like, I feel like that is to me going to be a huge takeaway for China. Is like, well, without the sanctions, or how do we approach that in a way that we can get around this or work around it, and then that's going to enable them to, do what they need to do.
Well, and honestly, like if you're sitting in China's seat, number one, they want Taiwan, but also remember there's a lot of mutual investment between Taiwan and China, so there's a lot of money there. So invading Taiwan is not beneficial to that. And hopefully as time goes on, that gets lesser and lesser in China. Because understand, Taiwan isn't as much of an embarrassment for China as like Hong Kong. Hong Kong was humiliation from the West without question. Taiwan is an internal matter, right? Chiang Kai-shek and 48 and all that. That's a little bit different. But my hope is, my sincere hope is that because of what China is seeing happen in Ukraine, that their event horizon, if they're thinking of doing anything in Taiwan, got pushed out a little bit further. And as it gets further and further pushed out, the likelihood of that invasion becomes less and less. And that's my hope. But I don't know. Like trying to understand what mad, crazy people that look like Winnie the Pooh are willing to do is really difficult.
Where the U.S. or the U.S. intelligence agencies, military, they're also getting the same intel about like what Russia could do. It's crazy, and like what would happen if this went down, and how unprepared they were. They had expired MREs from like 5 years ago, right?
Crazy.
Like but either way, right? If you would have asked before this war started, the U.S. intelligence agencies, and they kind of said this, and a lot of people, echoed this, that they thought the U.S. or the Russian military was going to take this in like 3 days. They said it publicly multiple times, right? Public press briefings. This is not going to. If they attack, it will go quickly, so on and so forth, right? That did not happen. And then when it all broke apart, we started seeing that, in essence, the Russian military is kind of an echo of, the Cold War, right? Like they're still have a lot of that stuff, like a lot of skeletons still in the closet, right? And I don't know, it is interesting, but back to your point, just about like China getting to see it, the U.S. gets to see the side of this as well.
Yeah.
One of the things I fully expect is happening in Taiwan, like right now, is the United States storing a tremendous amount of munitions, from like, Taipei to Hsinchu to Longdong to like all these different places around Taiwan. And they're just storing it there for the United States. Because I think that we're all surprised at how effective individuals are with the right technology against legacy Cold War iron, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you're looking at Javelin, you're looking at Stingers, and how effective that is at shutting down a modern, quote unquote, like not quite modern, but semi-modern, fully mechanized military. Oh my God. It's amazing. And if I was the US, I'd be parking as many of those weapons and storing them in strategic locations in Taiwan, just waiting.
That's great perspective. Great perspective. And even when we look back at like Ukraine, they got, if I'm not mistaken, $1.2 billion in military assistance in the last 24 months in Ukraine. And there are anti-aircraft systems that have been knocking Russian planes and helicopters out of the sky over Kiev for the last 10 days. I personally have pictures of my friends who have Stingers and Javelins, and it really does make a difference because, when you plan and coordinate an attack that you think is going to last 2 days and you only have that much fuel, that much food, and it goes into 10 days, the morale of your soldiers, the morale of your troops really drops down. And it's like you said, this organic war in combination with a cyber war, that is the recipe for success. Russia didn't prepare properly for this. They prepared their own people with propaganda, but they didn't black out Ukraine's internet. People are still uploading basically evidence of war crimes daily. If they would have dropped the grid from day one, you would have never seen this. We would never see the New York Times posting pictures of a dead family that was trying to run away. We would never see apartment buildings blown up. So in this case, did Russia do the right thing or the wrong thing by not taking out the grid on day one?
Yeah, taking out the internet could have been a very, very strong force multiplier for them, right? So.
Absolutely.
But can we talk tactically, though, about how bad their comms are in the first place, right? So 2 things. One, they were relying, I have no doubt in my mind, I mean, that from a tactical standpoint, they left the cell network enabled at a minimum, right? And you need data behind that to use most anything but voice comms. They left that enabled because they knew they needed it first and foremost.
Better compass.
And then secondarily, they thought this was all going to be done in a couple of days, in which case, do you want to rebuild or do you want to, so I think that there's multiple layers to that, but
But there is, I mean, and if you look at comms and power, right? Like, we've talked about it many times, like the comms in Iraq, part 2, were actually up much longer than people thought that they were going to be up. And part of the reason why is we were in those networks, right? We were in those networks. We were watching the communications. We were able to get intel off of those networks. Those networks were only up as long as they served the purpose of the United States. And when Russia went in, I seriously thought that they were doing the same thing. Like, I seriously thought, like, they're not going to take down the networks. They're not going to take down the internet because they're tracking, where all of the leadership is. They're pulling down that wasn't the case. So that's fascinating to me. You leave the internet up and you leave those comms up, you leave cell networks up. And the only reason why you do that is if it gives you an advantage. And in the United States, in previous conflicts, it has given us the advantage because we can literally pinpoint where communications are coming from, where command structures are, where people are moving to. And like I said, the fact that it stayed up didn't surprise me in the onset because I thought they had the same thing. But damn, now I'm like, why is it still up? But now Starlink's there and Elon Musk has saved everyone. So
I was gonna say Starlink's like the the SDN deployment, which is just overall they're bringing sat into combat zone, having comms, right? So it's pretty useful.
But Elon Musk, I guarantee you, Elon Musk is getting orders from everybody all over the world, including in Taiwan. Like, they just found a new market space. And all of a sudden, the ability to cut comms is way more difficult than it ever was. All right. So with that, folks, I want to say thank you so much. I appreciate the people from hanging out. Jeremiah, continue to be safe. I'm going to say that for you too, Jake, because I know the way you roll as well. And Corey and Ralph, thank you so much for coming and hanging out. And with that, Ryan, take us out.